her voice icy and commanding as she barked into it. "I need security here right now," she said, her voice echoing across the parking lot. "There's a black boy wandering around, acting suspicious. I think he's up to something." Nearby, the boy in question, Jaden, a 15-year-old wearing a neat school uniform, stood frozen, his dark eyes wide with fear. He clutched the straps of his backpack tightly, his breath short and uneven. The silence of the tense parking lot was shattered by the sudden creak of City Hall's doors opening. All eyes turned to Harriet Brooks, the city's mayor, striding out with resolute determination. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, each step radiating authority and anger. "The boy you're trying to detain," she said, her voice slicing through the air, "is my son." Karen White, the woman on the phone, turned to Harriet. Her face drained of color as she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Let's reflect on this true story. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification for more daily stories like this one. Don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Minutes earlier, Jaden, a black teenager, had been sitting on his backpack on the sidewalk of the public parking lot across from City Hall, waiting for his mom to finish work. A well-worn novel lay open on his lap, its pages smudged with his fingerprints. Though his eyes were fixed on the book, his face betrayed the joy in his thoughts. He smiled to himself, thinking about the burger his mom had promised him after work. She rarely got off early, but when she did, their small outings were moments he cherished. The parking lot was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chatter of people leaving the building. As thoughts of dinner with his mom drifted away, Jaden turned another page, his mind slipping into the story's world. But as the minutes passed, his legs began to ache from sitting. He tucked the book back into his bag, stood up, and stretched his arms overhead. He began pacing along the sidewalk at the edge of the parking lot, occasionally pausing to take in the bustling city streets, the hurried commuters, and the cars filled with the laughter of happy families. He felt lucky. His family was loving, and he dreamed of growing up to become a successful entrepreneur to repay his parents for their sacrifices. Lost in thoughts about his bright future, Jaden didn't notice the glass doors of City Hall opening behind him. A white woman in an elegant suit and high heels stepped out, heading briskly toward the parking lot. At first, Jaden paid her no mind, but a sense of unease washed over him, as if someone were watching him. Karen White stopped in her tracks as her gaze landed on Jaden. Her sharp eyes followed his every move as he walked near the parked cars. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and a flicker of irritation crossed her face. In her mind, the sight of a black teenager wandering a parking lot sparked immediate concern. Clutching her handbag tighter, she walked toward him. "Hey!" she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon. Jaden stopped mid-step and turned around, startled by her sharp tone. He frowned in confusion before responding. "Yes, ma'am?" Karen crossed her arms, scrutinizing him. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "This is a parking lot. You don't belong here." Jaden blinked, his expression shifting to polite bewilderment. "I'm waiting for my mom," he explained, his tone steady. "She works here." Karen's eyes narrowed, her suspicion clear. "Your mom works here?" she repeated, her tone dripping with doubt. "What exactly does she do, clean the floors?" Jaden's cheeks flushed with anger as he responded. "No, ma'am," he said firmly. "She works in City Hall." But Karen wasn't interested in his answer. She shook her head, her eyes narrowing further. "I've been watching you," she said. "You've been walking around this parking lot for a while, your eyes darting to the cars. What are you really up to?" "I'm not up to anything," Jaden said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I told you, I'm just waiting for my mom." Karen, angered by what she perceived as defiance, pulled out her phone, determined not to let the boy off easily. "I don't have time for this nonsense," she muttered. Dialing quickly, she raised the phone to her ear and spoke loudly. "Security? There's a black boy loitering in the parking lot. He's pacing and looking around, acting very suspicious. I think he's planning something. Send someone down here immediately." Jaden's heart pounded. He felt a mix of confusion and anger at being unfairly accused. His fingers tightened around his backpack straps as he tried to steady his breath. Opening his mouth, he tried to explain once more. "Ma'am, this is a public parking lot. I'm just standing on the sidewalk waiting for my mom. What's the problem?" Karen, tucking her expensive phone into her handbag, looked down at Jayden with a satisfied smirk. "Security will be here soon," she said coldly. "You can explain yourself to them." Moments later, a tall, broad-shouldered security guard emerged from the building. Mr. Miller, clad in a neatly pressed uniform, strode toward them with a serious demeanor. Seeing the approaching guard, Jayden's anxiety spiked. He thought of the news stories about black teenagers being harassed by police or security for no reason. A sinking feeling of familiarity overtook him, and he silently prayed his mom would arrive soon to end this nightmare. When Miller reached them, he frowned and spoke in a deep, authoritative voice. "What's going on here?" Karen stepped forward, gesturing toward Jayden as she spoke confidently. "This boy has been wandering around the parking lot, looking at the cars suspiciously. It's clear he's up to no good." Jayden's stomach churned. His face flushed red as he endured the baseless accusation. Miller turned to him, his sharp eyes scanning him from head to toe. "Son," Miller said firmly, "what are you doing here?" "I'm waiting for my mom," Jayden said, his voice shaky. "She works in City Hall." Before Miller could respond, Karen interjected. "Don't believe him," she said disdainfully. "He's lying. You need to get him out of here." Miller frowned, leaning closer to Jayden. "Do you have any ID?" Jayden shook his head, his hands trembling. "No, sir," he said. "I'm only 15. I don't have an ID." The situation spiraled as Jayden realized his words were falling on deaf ears. Anger and helplessness bubbled up inside him as he felt trapped by the false accusations. Miller's expression hardened. "Then you'll have to come with me to the station until we can figure this out," he said, stepping closer. Jayden's eyes widened in panic. He backed away, his breaths coming faster. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm not going anywhere." Miller reached out, grabbing Jayden's arm. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Miller said. Instinctively, Jayden yanked his arm away. "Let me go," he shouted, tears streaming down his face. Karen gasped, her face twisted with indignation. "See?" she said. "He's being aggressive. I told you he was trouble." The commotion quickly drew the attention of passers-by. A small crowd began to form, murmurs growing louder as people pulled out their phones to make video. Jayden felt the weight of their stares, their judgment pressing down on him like a heavy load. He cried harder, his mind racing with fears of the worst possible outcome. Headlines labeling him a criminal, his mother's disappointment, and the lasting humiliation. As Miller struggled to restrain Jayden and Karen looked on smugly, the tension in the air became unbearable. Just when it seemed everything had spiraled out of control, a commanding voice rang out. "Let him go!" The crowd fell silent instantly, heads turning toward the source of the voice. There stood Harriet Brooks, the mayor of the city, striding into the scene with an air of authority. The late afternoon sun cast its warm glow over City Hall's sleek facade. Inside her office, Harriet Brooks leaned back in her plush chair, her mind still buzzing from a day packed with meetings, phone calls, and endless paperwork. She glanced at the clock on her desk and smiled faintly. It had been a long day, but she had promised her son, Jayden, that they'd have dinner together. He was waiting for her in the parking lot, and she hated the thought of keeping him waiting any longer. With a sense of purpose, Harriet pushed her chair back and stood, smoothing out her tailored blazer. She draped her custom-made coat over her shoulders, slipped on her favorite pair of heels, and grabbed her leather briefcase. Stepping out of her office, she pressed the button for the elevator and watched the doors glide open. As the elevator descended, Harriet thought about Jayden and how patient he always was with her busy schedule. She made a silent promise to let him order as many of his favorite dishes as he wanted tonight. It was a small way to make up for the long hours she'd spent away from him lately. When the elevator chimed and the doors slid open, Harriet stepped into the lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She pushed open the glass doors and was greeted by the cool evening breeze. But just as she was about to walk toward her car, something caught her attention. A small crowd had gathered near the far end of the parking lot. At first, Harriet thought it might be a minor commotion, an argument over a parking spot or something equally mundane. But as she drew closer, she heard a voice. It was high-pitched and frantic, cutting through the murmur of the onlookers. It was Jayden's voice. Her heart sank, and a cold sense of dread washed over her. Quickening her pace, Harriet's heels clacked louder against the pavement. She weaved through the crowd, catching snippets of conversation. That poor boy. Why are they treating him like that? Someone should call his parents. And then she saw him. Jaden was in the middle of the crowd, struggling to pull his arm free from the grip of Miller, the head of City Hall security. His face was flushed, tears streaming down his cheeks as he cried out, "Let me go. I didn't do anything wrong." Next to Miller stood Karen White, her arms crossed smugly and her voice rising over the noise. "You see how he's resisting? He's dangerous. I told you he was trouble." Harriet's chest tightened as she took in the scene. Her son, humiliated and terrified, surrounded by strangers filming with their phones and whispering among themselves. Her fury boiled over. "Let him go," she shouted, her voice ringing out like a thunderclap. The crowd fell silent, and every head turned in her direction. Miller and Karen froze, their eyes widening in shock. Harriet pushed through the remaining few onlookers until she stood in front of her son. Her commanding presence, enhanced by her tailored coat and heels, left no doubt as to who she was. "Madam Mayor," Miller stammered, his hand immediately releasing Jaden's arm. Karen's face turned ghostly pale, her confident smirk replaced with sheer panic. Jaden's tear-streaked face lit up with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Mom," he cried, his voice breaking as he threw himself into her arms. Harriet held him tightly, one hand stroking his back, her other arm protectively shielding him from the crowd. "The boy you wanted to arrest," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm, "is my son." Jaden's tear-streaked face lit up with relief. "Mom," he cried, his voice trembling with emotion. Harriet rushed to her son, pulling him into a protective embrace. His tears soaked into her blazer as he clung to her. Finally feeling safe, Harriet turned sharply, her fiery gaze locking onto Karen and Miller. Her voice was cold and cutting as she spoke. "The boy you're trying to detain is my son." Karen's face went pale. Her lips trembled as she tried to form a response. "Your son?" she stammered. "What did my son do to deserve this treatment?" Harriet demanded, her voice rising with anger. Karen's confidence faltered, her expression shifting to one of regret. "I didn't know he was your son. This was just a misunderstanding," she said weakly. Miller stood stiffly, staring at the ground in shame. Harriet bent down slightly, cupping Jaden's tear-streaked face in her hands. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Jaden nodded, his voice shaky but steady. "I'm okay now, Mom." Straightening, Harriet turned to face Karen and Miller, her voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I want an explanation as to why my son was being interrogated on the sidewalk of a public parking lot." Miller's authoritative tone was replaced with hesitation. "Ma'am, I received a call about a suspicious youth," he said. Harriet interrupted, her eyebrows raised. "And what exactly made my son suspicious?" Karen stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He'd been pacing around for hours, ma'am," she said. Harriet's tone was calm but sharp. "So, a black teenager standing on a sidewalk in a public parking lot is grounds for suspicion?" she asked. Her expression was a mix of disappointment and resolve as she continued. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have some bias at play here. Was my son approached with the same presumption of innocence you'd extend to any other citizen?" The crowd fell silent, a collective weight settling over them. Harriet's voice grew firmer. "This is a wake-up call for everyone here. Unfounded suspicion can have serious consequences. We must examine our biases and work toward creating a community where everyone feels safe and welcomed." The crowd murmured in agreement, the gravity of her words sinking in. Karen muttered an apology, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Miller shifted uncomfortably, his posture rigid with shame. Harriet placed a comforting hand on Jaden's shoulder and addressed the crowd once more. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. We must do better, starting with confronting our own prejudices and standing against injustice." With that, she guided Jaden toward the sleek black SUV parked nearby. The crowd watched in stunned silence as they climbed into the car. As the vehicle pulled out of the lot, Jaden leaned against the window, his mother's reassuring hand resting on his shoulder. "Let's go get that burger," Harriet said gently. As they drove away, Harriet reflected on the incident. This was a sobering reminder of the challenges society still faced, a call to action to confront biases and build a more equitable world. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Our actions in the face of prejudice would define the world we live in, and silence was no longer an option. The sleek black SUV glided smoothly through the city streets, leaving the tense scene of the parking lot behind. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter, though the weight of what had transpired still lingered heavily between mother and son. Harriet Brooks, usually so composed and confident, found herself gripping the steering wheel tightly, her mind swirling with emotions. Jaden sat beside her, leaning against the window, his face still streaked with dried tears. He stared out at the blur of passing buildings, his thoughts too jumbled to form words. Harriet glanced over at him, her heart aching at the sight of her son, so young, yet forced to carry the weight of a world that often judged him unfairly. After a few moments of silence, Harriet spoke, her voice softer than usual. "You handled yourself well back there, Jaden," she said, her eyes flicking to him briefly before returning to the road. Jaden shrugged, his shoulders still tense. "I didn't feel like I did," he